The world of drug trafficking has been dominated by two groups in the last 50 years. The dreaded Medellin and the Sinaloa cartels of Mexico. More famous than the cartels, however, were their notorious leaders, the Medellin's Pablo Escobar and Sinaloa's Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. Their reigns have ended, no doubt, Escobar in a bloody shootout in December 1993, and El Chapo's arrest in 2016, where he was extradited to the U.S. and sentenced to jail for a very long time. But in their time, both were an unstoppable force in South America. Between the two, who was the richer and more powerful? Let's find out. The rise to crime. Escobar. The one thing that both drug lords had in common was their rags-to-riches story. Both came from humble beginnings, and both grew up in drug-infested communities that influenced them to choose a life of crime. Both were sons of farmers, but while Escobar's father was a regular farmer, Guzmán's father was already farming marijuana on his own plantation in the village of La Tuna, Sinaloa, Mexico. Escobar's poverty and life in Medellin was harsh. He was a street thug in his early teens, robbing cars, until he graduated to working as a kidnapper and bodyguard for drug smugglers like Alvaro Prieto, who operated in the Medellin and wanted to earn $1 million by the age of 22. For Escobar, it was a stepping stone to a life of untold riches, fame, violence, and crime. Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. Guzmán, on the other hand, fed up with his father squandering away the family earnings, opened his own marijuana farm when he was a teenager, along with 4 cousins. Not satisfied with the money he was making, he ultimately went to work for his uncle, who introduced him to the higher-ups in the cartels of Mexico. Guzmán began working for drug lord Héctor El Güero Palma, who ran a syndicate that transported drugs from Mexico to the USA. Guzmán's job was to make sure the consignments were transported safely across the border. It was during this time that Guzmán's notoriety gained popularity as a man who did not tolerate failure and eliminated enemies and double-crossers without a second thought. Who was most powerful? Pablo Escobar and Joaquín Guzmán may have ruled over the drug trade in South America at different timelines, but their climb to the top was similar and marked a world of competition, vendettas, shocking violence, unspeakable and horrific crimes, and tons of wealth. It was Escobar's death and the downfall of Medellin in the early 90s that made Guzmán the most powerful drug lord of South America. But when you compare the two in terms of power, it is Escobar who held an edge over El Chapo. Escobar enjoyed a lot of political patronage and government support for almost the entirety of his drug trafficking career. Pablo Escobar enjoyed government support. Pablo Escobar was so powerful, he even got himself elected to the Chamber of Representatives of Colombia. He engaged heavily in politics and bribed judges, policemen, and politicians. He cared little for social status, and as much as he patronized them with money, anyone opposing him would be dealt with swiftly. He led by the principle of bullet or bribe, and it was folly for anyone to refuse the latter. Believe it or not, but Escobar was also the official representative of the Colombian government for the swearing-in of Felipe González in Spain. El Chapo lived by the gun. Guzmán, on the other hand, did not enjoy much political clout, but was always wanted by Mexican authorities, especially after eliminating a top DEA agent, Enrique Camarena Salazar. Guzmán was always living in different locations in South America, including Guadalajara. However, he gained more notoriety than Escobar. Guzmán was forever involved with feuds and wars with opponents. The Tijuana cartel, run by the Arellano Felix clan especially, was one of his worst enemies, and the violence between the two left only a pile of bodies in its wake. The feuding between Guzmán and the Arellano Felix brothers was a bloody one that lasted more than 6 months. It went too far when the Cardinal of Guadalajara, Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo, fell to one of their bullets, caught in a crossfire during a shootout between Guzmán and Felix outside Guadalajara International Airport. An enraged Mexican government launched a manhunt for all those involved in the attack, including Guzmán. Escobar, on the other hand, enjoyed so much government support that upon pressure from the DEA, the Colombian government put Escobar in prison on his own terms. The prison was a 5-star one made by Escobar himself, which he called the Cathedral. It was a clear mockery of justice, but this was Pablo Escobar, and no government official wanted to be involved in his arrest or incarceration. Their drug empire. Both drug lords worked in different markets. Pablo Escobar concentrated mostly on cocaine. He was a bit more organized than El Chapo, had more control over his empire, and he influenced almost everyone in the country, which led to smoother operations. Escobar was hardly challenged, and that worked in his favor. El Chapo, on the other hand, went the whole hog and dealt with marijuana, cocaine, ecstasy, heroin, and crystal methamphetamine. Escobar's organized way of trafficking drugs was so successful that by the 70s he was the world's biggest cocaine producer, and by the early 80s he was shipping hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cocaine to the voracious US market. However, it is difficult to put an exact figure on his net worth, although it ran into the billions. Escobar earned billions. Escobar became one of the most powerful men in the world and was making more than $420 million a week. By the mid-80s, he was making $22 billion a year. By the end of the 80s, Medellin, under Escobar, was supplying 80% of the world's cocaine and smuggling 15 tons of it into the US every day. Escobar was so influential that he even featured on Forbes' billionaire list with a net worth of $3 billion in 1993. In today's market value, that would be around $6.6 billion. However, Escobar's son, Sebastian Marroquin, went on record to rubbish the figures of Forbes in 2011, saying Forbes hadn't even come close. He also said it wasn't possible to establish a figure from drug trafficking, as mobsters never keep accounts, least of all his father, Pablo Escobar. Escobar's brother Roberto once said that Escobar was making so much money every year, they would write off 10% of the money because rats were eating the money in storage. And this conjures up a scene from the Will Smith film Bad Boys 2, where the drug lord's money was being eaten by rats in his storage. Maybe they were influenced by Escobar. El Chapo's billions. When Guzmán was arrested in 2019, he too was the wealthiest and most powerful drug lord in Mexico. The fact that Medellin had collapsed by this time gave Guzmán the opportunity to exploit the entire market. Guzmán was smuggling tons of cocaine shipments from Colombia and Mexico to the United States. He used all modes of transport, land, sea, and air, with a clever network of distribution cells throughout Mexico. He was also importing heroin from Southeast Asia, and together with cocaine, Mexican methamphetamine and marijuana was pushing it into the USA. Guzmán was known as godfather of the drug world. By the early 2000s, Guzmán became a billionaire. He was ranked the 10th richest man in all of Mexico. To add to his billions, he even established a shipping and transport empire, although it may have been a front for transporting his drugs, and that's quite an intelligent business to think of, especially when logistics and transport is the prime focus of a business like Guzmán's. While Escobar was more the typical businessman type, albeit a dangerous and cold-blooded one, Guzmán was more mafia. The DEA referred to him as the godfather of the drug world, and he has often been regarded as the biggest drug lord of all time. Many feel he was far more powerful and dangerous than Pablo Escobar, and is the first one after Al Capone to be named public enemy number 1 because of his criminal activity in Chicago, even though he had never actually been there. Guzmán used the power vacuum created by the cartels in Colombia. As soon as the Mexican government cracked down on his rivals, he stepped in and took over. Guzmán was ruthless and always went unscathed from government action. By now, the Sinaloa Cartel was controlling 35% of the cocaine produced in Colombia, and according to the DEA, it was supplying 80% of the heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and methamphetamine to the Chicago region of the US each year. They loved spending. When it came to spending, both men loved splurging their wealth, and obviously so because they were making it faster than lightning. If rats were eating their money, then it was better to spend. Witnesses testifying against Guzmán at his trial said he had purchased 4 jets, a ranch in every state, including his family one in Acapulco that cost $10 million. He also owned a yacht named Chapito. Guzmán even owned a house on every major beach and his own private zoo in Guadalajara. On his ranch, he even kept wild animals like tigers, lions, panthers, and deer. Escobar donated huge amounts to charity. As for Pablo Escobar, the man was making so much cash, he would stash it away in Colombian farming fields, dilapidated warehouses, and in the walls of cartel members' homes. Escobar loved lavish living, but he was smart too. He donated a sizable amount into the community and built several facilities for the poor who lived in Medellin. He built schools, hospitals, soccer fields, and parks, and handed out money to the poor. This won him the hearts of the people, which is why he garnered so much public support. When the DEA asked the Colombian government to imprison Escobar, the man agreed that it would be in his own prison called the Cathedral. It was equipped with amenities like a jacuzzi, a waterfall, a full bar, and a soccer field. Their end. There was a common fact that bound the fates of both men, and that is that they went too far. Escobar's blatant drug trafficking attracted American action, and finally the Colombian government couldn't protect him anymore. Escobar's reign of terror and violence came to an end when he attempted to resist arrest. His drug trafficking angered the Colombian government, which by now had realized what Pablo Escobar really was. When the DEA and the Colombian officials said enough is enough, Escobar made several attempts to get back through his contacts, but unfortunately for him, It was the wrong thing to do. A task force by the Colombian government ended in a shootout which killed Escobar. Guzmán's final arrest. Joaquín Guzmán was luckier than Escobar. Guzmán was arrested 3 times and escaped. Finally, in 2016, he was again arrested by the DEA in an operation called Black Swan that included 17 Marines from Mexican Special Forces, the Mexican Army, and the police. Guzmán was extradited to the USA in 2017, where he was tried by a New York court and sentenced to life imprisonment and an additional 30 years. It is unlikely he will ever come out of jail. So what do you think? El Chapo or Pablo Escobar? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel.